The European Union is done being held hostage by its own veto rules.
It's really regrettable that the decision that all countries reached in the European Council, all the leaders, is now that there is now stepping back from this decision.
The new Dutch government is in favor of less and less decision-making by unanimity on a European level.
With key critical security and economic decisions repeatedly getting blocked by a handful of rogue states, Brussels is finally getting ready to pull the trigger on a drastic solution, a multi-speed Europe. It's a brand new system where a core group of willing nations will be allowed to go ahead with much deeper integration if they so desire, leaving the foot draggers behind in the slow lane. And beyond this is Prague Pulse, and today we're looking at the rapidly approaching reality of a multi-speed European Union and where exactly that leaves the heart of Europe, so Poland, Czechia, Slovakia and Hungary, once this new reality hits us fully. Now, to understand how we got here, we have to first look at the sheer paralysis of the current system within the EU. For years, the idea of a multi-speed EU, or a Europe of concentric circles, was just a theoretical debate floated by French and German intellectuals. Today, it's actually an operational reality unfolding as we speak. The EU is facing a perfect storm of crises. The pressure of Russian aggression against Ukraine and the EU, a widening productivity gap with the US and China, and the daunting prospect of enlarging the bloc to 30 or even more member states in the future. In this environment, waiting for 27 capitals to unanimously agree on every single move is just strategic suicide. Now, we actually saw the breaking point of all this in December 2025, when 24 out of the 27 EU member states simply used the so-called enhanced cooperation mechanism to effectively bypass the vetoes of the other 3 member states to push through a 90 billion euro joint debt loan program to Ukraine. And that single decision has effectively shattered the illusion of a unified bloc in the EU and has officially ushered in a tiered Europe instead. This new architecture essentially features an inner circle for deep defense, fiscal and political integration, that is tier 1. Then we have the standard EU single market without the deep integration on stuff like defense, that is tier 2. An associate membership tier stripped of voting rights, tier 3. And an outer consultative ring, tier 4. And for our region, the impact of this change is seismic. The old narrative of the V4 acting as a unified Central European bloc within Brussels is now completely dead. Now, before we break down exactly where each Central European country will end up in this new system, I have a quick challenge for you. My goal is actually to reach the first 1,000 subscribers on this channel before the end of June 26, and we're already so close. So if you're enjoying this deep dive and want to help an independent geopolitical channel actually survive the YouTube algorithm, which is becoming more difficult by the day, please hit that subscribe button. It's free, it takes you literally 1 second, and it genuinely helps me grow. And now, back to the heart of Europe. Poland's trajectory is actually the most striking in the region. Under the previous PIS conservative government, Warsaw was viewed as a regional rebel inside the EU. We've also discussed it on Prague Pulse before. But today, under Prime Minister Donald Tusk, Poland has actually rocketed straight into the EU's tier 1 inner circle. They're actually the only Central European country to have been invited into the prestigious E6 coalition, the grouping of 6 EU member states that should be integrating the most quickly inside the core. And how did Poland manage to rebrand so quickly? Well, the massive speed of its army buildup definitely plays a role. We've also talked about it on Prague Pulse. Basically, Poland is quickly becoming the biggest army on the continent, outpacing the traditional giants like the UK, Germany or France. Let me give you just a small example. Poland has actually ordered so many South Korean tanks that once delivered, they will have more tanks than Germany, France, the UK and Italy combined. And so I guess that not having such a formidable, strong military force within the EU's core would be just dangerous for the rest of the continent. But the glaring irony here is that in spite of all this, Poland still remains entirely outside some other EU integration projects which are already functional, such as the Eurozone. And one would expect that traditionally having the euro as currency would be prerequisite for any sort of core EU membership. Maybe it's the case that the military is actually becoming the #1 currency, so to speak, that matters more these days, more than having the euro. We'll have to see. Hungary, on the other hand, represents the clearest case of a member state that's actively and voluntarily choosing an outsider position in the EU instead. Due to relentless rule of law violations, Hungary actually still has approximately 19 billion euros in EU funds frozen and cannot access it. And while the rest of Europe is painfully getting rid of its dependence on Russian energy following the invasion of Ukraine, Hungary is actually expanding its reliance on Russia voluntarily. Furthermore, China has now become Hungary's #1 source of foreign investment, which turned the country into what analysts call China's European bridgehead. So that all means that in a multi-speed EU, Hungary would face the very real threat of forced de-integration, basically. There is now massive momentum already to use the Article 7 procedure to indefinitely suspend Hungary's voting rights in the EU because it's just a troublemaker. And this would essentially downgrade Hungary to a Tier 3 associate member status. And I mean, when you think about it, they shouldn't mind that much, right? Orbán has been spending so much of his time hating on Brussels anyway, so a way out is exactly what he should be after. Unless, of course, this all is just a game mainly for the domestic audience, and he still needs the EU's money to finance Hungary's development. Czechia occupies a deeply uncomfortable middle ground in all this. Economically, the country is inextricably linked to the German industrial engine and the German economy. Germany is Czechia's largest trading partner and absorbs 32.5% of all Czech exports. This basically means that the country is completely locked into German supply chains and to the conditions of its own industry. If the German economy is doing well, so is the Czech economy, and vice versa. So, if Germany and the E6 integrate even more economically, Czechia absolutely must participate to protect its own export-driven economy. And yet, historically, Czechia has been very skeptical of any kind of further EU integration. It still, for example, doesn't use the euro, although it would undeniably make business with Germany easier and so the Czech economy better. And it staunchly refuses any other integration project, even if it would help the Czech economy. Quite the contrary, actually. The new government of Andrej Babiš has started drifting more and more toward the fringes. In December 2025, completely out of its own choosing, Czechia joined Hungary and Slovakia to opt out of a 90 billion euro joint debt program for Ukraine. So that means that in any potential multi-speed EU, Czechia now risks becoming an economic satellite without actually any real power. Structurally, it is forced and will be forced to follow the rules set by Germany and the core because of how much tight the economies are. But politically, it will remain locked out of the room where the most important rules are being actually written. And finally, we have Slovakia, which is arguably the most fascinating and yet the most contradictory case of them all. On paper, at least, Slovakia is an absolute Tier 1 overachiever. It is one of only 21 EU states fully integrated into every major EU structure, including the euro. They have the Schengen since 2007, and they have been using the euro since 2009. And you would think that this guarantees them a seat at the adult table. But under Prime Minister Robert Fico, Slovakia is actually acting like a petulant child. Fico has routinely met with the dictator in the Kremlin, has halted all military aid to Ukraine, and pushed legislation that systematically erodes the rule of law in Slovakia, much like Orbán. Slovakia has also voluntarily chosen to remain roughly 90% dependent on Russian energy still today, and is now acting surprised that being supplied by a literal war criminal is very unreliable in and of itself. Now, because Slovakia actually has the euro, it actually possesses a structural shield that Hungary, for example, lacks. Because, see, it is incredibly difficult to downgrade a full Eurozone member to a Tier 3 country in the future multi-speed EU. However, the December 2025 vote, which I've already mentioned, where the 24 EU countries decided to vote without Slovakia, Czechia, and Hungary, is a perfect example that the rest of the EU is perfectly willing to build new mechanisms around countries like Slovakia. So that all means that in a future multi-speed EU, Slovakia may still technically sit in the Tier 1 category because it has the euro, but its political defiance guarantees it will be treated as a second-class member state anyway, because it just voluntarily chooses to behave in that way. The multi-speed EU project is no longer just an intellectual exercise, as we've shown. It is actively sorting Central European countries into distinct hierarchies. The V4, as a unified bloc capable of advocating for shared regional interests, is effectively dead. Poland is ascending to the geopolitical core of the continent, Czechia is caught in a hesitant middle ground, and Hungary and Slovakia are just a disruptive pro-Russian pair drifting steadily toward the institutional periphery, but they still desperately need EU money, of course. The era of easy integration in the EU is simply over. If these countries want a seat at the table together with big guys and girls, they simply have to earn it first. Let's see how that goes. If you want to keep up with how this new EU reality unfolds across Central Europe, make sure to hit that subscribe button and leave a comment down below letting me know which tier you think that your country will end up in. I'm Jan, this is Prague Pulse, and I'll see you in the next one.